Discussions of wartime Warsaw generally cover topics ranging from the gradual obliteration of its architectural fabric to design work carried out by German and Polish architects and planners for the period following the armed conflict. Little is said that from September 1939 to January 1945, Warsaw was a site of diverse building activity carried out by the occupiers and the occupied. Both sides of the conflict deeply impacted Warsaw's fabric through the carrying out of their disparate wartime goals. The purpose of the Nazi project was to reorganize Warsaw. Theirs was an invasive attempt at concentrating on, and constraining the pre-war city. By contrast, the building activity of Warsaw's original residents had minimal impact on the external appearance of the city. Ephemeral in nature, such construction aimed at eluding the occupiers and facilitating covert movement. The area in which all of this architectural production occurred was small, concentrated in Warsaw's inner city. Here, before the war, the city's multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and linguistically diverse population of 1.3 million lived in close proximity of one another, competing for space to live, work, play, and worship. Warsaw's inner city was densely developed with buildings of all functions, shapes, construction methods, and age. It was the area of the city with the most prestigious historic modern architecture, but also with the large quantity of low-cost, primarily 19th century construction, an environment of substandard living and working conditions. Its dense and irregularly patchwork of street patterns reflected centuries of gradual idiosyncratic development. Since the September 1939 blitzkrieg, it was also the city's most damaged area. In the years leading up to the war, this section of Warsaw had been subject to intense scrutiny of local architects, planners, social reformers, and city administrators, all advocating its redevelopment and replanning along the lines of rationalist and functionalist models that would prefer to make much of it to disappear. Ironically, it was this dense, irregular, and cluttered environment that proved so advantageous for both passive and active forms of resistance staged by the local population during the war. For the Third Reich, the 54-square-mile Warsaw was conceived as a labor camp, train depot, administrative office, all in support of the Eastern Front. The vast majority of investment was in the realm of manufacture and rail transportation through the expansion and adaptation of what had pre-existed. The Nazi did not initiate any new building in Warsaw during the war, resorting instead to evictions for obtaining housing and office space. In the German plans for wartime Warsaw, the capital of Poland was to be a city of three groups: the Polish Jews, Christian Poles, and Germans, living together but separate, segregated by strictly enforced laws, and relegated to specific geographical locations. Since there were to be German, Christian Polish, and Jewish Polish Warsaws, the wartime was a period of mass-scale citywide rehousing. Despite repeated attempts staged by the Nazi administration to establish an exclusive German neighborhood, such an enclave did not materialize until the end of the Nazi occupation in the spring of 1944, and was occupied a small triangular area in the southern end of the city center. The widely used Nazi term Aryan side of Warsaw was a fiction as far as Germans and Christian Poles were concerned. The Germans, the military, civilian administrative support, and business opportunists, opted to live under the cover of Polish residents as a shield against Soviet and Allied air raids, resorting to cosmetic but effective forms of separation and spatial demarcation, such as the hanging of the Third Reich flags and the renaming of streets and squares with German names. The public transportation system, restaurants and cafes, stores, theaters, cinemas were segregated, as were schools, playgrounds, and recreational and sports facilities. The ubiquitous sign for Germans only denoted spatial parameters for both Germans and Poles. Obstacles in form of barbed wire entanglements disrupted traffic, blocked streets, and restricted access to buildings. The few permanent structures that Nazi did add to Warsaw's cityscape were there to protect them against flourishing insurgent activity. Reinforced concrete bunkers guarded the entrances to administrative buildings and apartment blocks in the domain of the Germans. The plan for 3 discrete spaces was fulfilled only as far as Warsaw's Jewish population was concerned. The best-known structure erected by the order of the Nazi administration was the wall that demarcated the 2 zones, the Jewish ghetto and the Aryan side. A 3.5-meter high brick wall, topped with glass and barbed wire, surrounded the northwest neighborhoods of Warsaw's inner city. The wall's path was highly irregular, following and dissecting streets, passing between some buildings, avoiding others. The Jewish administration, the Judenrat, and its Polish counterpart both negotiated with the Nazi administration for inclusion of streets and individual buildings into their respective parts of the city. As a result, the wall was frequently shifted. Readjustments were usually at the expense of the Jewish residents. The simplicity of the wall's construction, a single double layer of brick with slide support piers, allowed for its quick dis- and reassembly. In the final period during the fall of 1942 and winter 1943, the Jewish ghetto was reduced to 3 small autonomous areas. What has been described thus far was the city's new external layer. Beneath the gaze of the German Warsaw was a city constructed by Jewish and Christian Poles in response to conditions of occupation and those actions taken by the Nazi to regulate the city's environment. Their goal was to restore mobility and sense of autonomy to the city's inhabitants through the further fragmenting of this already divided city. Circumventing the wall and keeping unofficial traffic flowing between the 2 sides of the city was to become a full-time occupation for a significant group of people on both sides of the wall. Smuggling was a recognized profession, vital to Warsaw's wartime economy and vital to the survival of the ghetto's malnutrition population. Sewers and camouflaged underground passageways were one of such routes to bypass the surface barrier. During the war, Warsaw's 19th century sewer system has thus acquired a new function. In addition to keeping wastewater flowing, it also worked as a secondary circulation channel for goods and people. Aware of this role, the Nazi began investing in building blockades and traps within the tunnels and adding manholes into this list of surveillance sites. In preparation for their respective armed uprisings, the insurgent groups on either side of the wall, with the guidance of the sewers maintenance workers, fitted the sewers with directional and warning signs and tunnel connections to the canals from surrounding basements in the effort to avoid using the wall-guarded manholes. During the Jewish ghetto uprising of 1943 and the Warsaw uprising of 1944, the sewers were used extensively to maneuver troops, often serving as the only available escape routes. The extent to which the sewer system was used during the war earned it the status of a wartime monument. Tunnels were dug also beneath streets and connected basements of buildings on either side of the wall. According to the chronicler of the Warsaw Ghetto, Emanuel Ringelblum, covered underground passages were the most risky and expensive undertakings. The difficulty lay not in the construction, but in the disposal of excavated material. What made the tunnels possible was the narrowness of Warsaw streets, its density of buildings, and profusion of basement and cellars. Among the 4 documented underground tunnels dug within the ghetto, 2 tunnels connected Jewish and Aryan sides. The other 2 connected the ghetto's largest and as well surveillanced sweatshops precinct with the surrounding housing areas and facilitating the removal of stolen manufactured goods from the 2 largest factories in operation. practice of digging tunnels was continued by the insurgents on the Aryan side. As was the case with the sewers, numerous subterranean passageways were created in anticipation of armed conflict. During the weeks leading up to the August 1944 insurgency and into the uprising itself, tunnels were dug between basements of adjacent buildings, creating safe underground passageways used by the insurgents and civilians to move around undetected. Some of the earliest efforts at concealment had to do with the walling up storage rooms and cellars by Warsaw shopkeepers and factory owners, actions triggered by widespread looting that followed the Nazi entry into the city in September 1939. The low-cost and traditional construction methods of Warsaw 19th century tenements of brick and mortar with wooden framing allowed for alternations to be carried out in small increments and without much noise. The buildings damaged or destroyed during the early bombings were the source of recycled building materials. The practice of creating masked interiors by the walling up of existing spaces continued throughout the war on both sides of the ghetto wall. Ongoing deportations of the ghetto Jews who were unfit to work or who were unsuccessful in obtaining a work permit led to the widespread fabrication of concealed chambers. According to Ringelblum, designing and building hiding places was a flourishing specialized craft in the Warsaw Ghetto. Up until the fall of 1942, the most common form of a hideout was a sealed portion of an apartment, an alcove or a room, which acted as a temporary hiding place. Entrances to these vaults were from trap doors of adjacent rooms or from the apartments next door or those below or above. Ringelblum recorded a case of one tenement building in which all tenants living in the same vertical line of apartments coordinated their efforts and constructed covered rooms in the same place and manner, preserving the repetition of the floor plans. The walled spaces were connected with one another through openings in floors and ceilings reached by ladders, with the main exit constructed in a bakery oven in the building's ground floor. The Great Action, the mass-scale deportations of Jews to Treblinka extermination camp of summer 1942, forced remaining Jews, about 40 to 60,000, to conceive more permanent hideouts which would serve them until rescued. Unlike the earlier hiding above the ground spaces, the hideouts built in November and December 1942 were subterranean. The number of hiding quarters reached into the hundreds. Building shelters and fitting them with provisions that would sustain their residents for months was usually a collective effort. Co-workers and neighbors pulled together their last resources to build safe havens for themselves and their families. Some of the camouflage shelters were makeshift expansions and adaptations of pre-existing basements and tenement buildings or of storage rooms in factories and artisan shops. The expansion of a basement was often carried out in the ground below the inner courtyards or the building above. Most bunkers could accommodate only several people, while others were sophisticated interiors, insulated from the cold, comprised of multiple rooms, fitted with gas, electricity, telephone, water and plumbing, air shafts and alternative exits. Anticipating that the Nazis would take the ghetto off the grid and cut off the water, they were tapped into the gas, electric, and water supply from the Aryan side. When such connections were unavailable, builders resorted to such alternatives as barrels of distilled water and artesian wells. One of the largest and most elaborate underground shelter, with a capacity of 300, was a project financed by a successful black market entrepreneur. The bunker was comprised of numerous rooms, kitchens, dining halls, bathrooms, as well as bedrooms and entertainment rooms, and total 6 entries. Built beneath a tenement building in a perimeter expanded beyond the property lines, one wing of the bunker camouflaged beneath the rubble of the adjacent building. During the Jewish ghetto uprising, the bunker was offered by its owners for the command of the Jewish fighting organization responsible for the insurrection, and it eventually became the site of mass suicide. Practice of building camouflage spaces on the Aryan side varied from those created within the Jewish ghetto, a result of different restrictions and allowances of the occupation. Walled-up rooms on the Aryan side function as rental spaces for the estimated 20,000 Polish Jews who left ghetto during the final months, opting for a life hiding among the Christian Poles. But the most pressing need for development of disguised hiding facilities came from flourishing underground activity within the Aryan side. An estimated 150,000 men and women were actively involved. Much of this aspect of the resistance activity was conducted above ground within the realm of Warsaw's domestic architecture. Frequent relocations and rehousing orders issued by the Nazi administration facilitated the establishment on new clandestine locations. The frequent selling, buying, and renting of apartments was wartime reality for many Warsawians. And among those who did the buying and renting were the members of the resistance, financed by their respective organizations. The destruction of Warsaw during the first days of the war led to the profusion of a number of small-scale building companies that specialized in renovations and rebuilding projects. Some of those firms ended up carrying on both legal and illegal building activities. The most extensive underground organization was the Home Army, loyal to the London-based Polish government in exile. Within its administrative structure, the Bureau of Finance and Oversight was responsible for obtaining new apartments, establishing their official function or cover, and then retrofitting them for the clandestine activity. Several independent teams of architects, engineers, interior designers, masons, and cabinet makers carried out the commissions. At least one legally operated construction company, headed by the architect Tadeusz Baum in partnership with the architect Zygmunt Stępiński and others, received commissions from the Home Army to carry out renovations and adaptations of about 50 projects for the needs of the underground. To serve a location from clandestine activity, an apartment needed to meet criteria of blending in and escapability. Buildings located on busy streets with establishments such as a cafe or a store on the ground floor fit the profile. Especially sought after buildings were those with 2 or more independent staircases and interior courtyards with passageways linking them to adjacent properties. To separate staircases and entrances leading to the apartment, one for residents, another for domestic help, increased the possibility of escape in the event of discovery. The division of apartments into primary interiors and service quarters allowed for coexistence of legal and illegal activity. Second floor corner apartments with multiple exposures, including a view on the into the interior courtyard, offered the best locale for surveillance as well as for possible escape. High enough to give those in danger time to flee, but not too high to make the emergency exit through a window into the courtyard impossible. When top-floor apartments were subject to clandestine adaptation, they were equipped with escape hatches leading to attics and from there onto the roofs. Ideal for storage were ground floors or sub-basement apartments or other interiors with easily created alternative exits for the inner courtyards. As in the ghetto, built-in closets and alcoves, as well as entire rooms, were walled up and transformed into disguised storage facilities for people, weapons, documents, and communication devices. Small-scale vaults with disguised trigger mechanisms were built into floors, walls, window, and door frames. An adaptation process would be completed with a delivery of furniture, tables, chairs, chests of drawers, coat racks, picture frames, all specially retrofitted with similar secret compartments. One of the more elaborate clandestine space was that which served the Home Army's command headquarters. The 12-room apartment was fashioned by the joining of 3 pre-existing third-floor apartments through passages disguised as built-in bookcases and wardrobes. Apartments meeting the requirements were not difficult to find, especially in the central district of the city. Most desired apartments were the mid to late 19th century and early 20th century multi-family apartment buildings designed with multiple staircases, extensive basements, sub-basements, attics, and arranged around central courtyards. Apartments were ideal as meeting locations, offices, safe havens for those on the run. They were appropriate for such activities as the forging of documents or preparing clandestine publications. But large-scale production activity, an important component of Polish underground activity, required another setting, larger, more industrial in nature. The two large forms of production carried out by the Polish underground were publishing and production of weapons and ammunition. In both cases, legal printing presses and ammunition factories operated in subterranean spaces. The facilities existed under the camouflage of legal businesses, some pre-existing, others established directly for the purpose. They ranged from small shops, such as toy stores or fruit and vegetable stores, to small-scale manufacturing facilities, for example, a paint factory or brewery. Textual descriptions of these underground operations paint an image of rudimentary facility, cave-like and with minimal connections, for security reasons, with the outside world. The accounts refer to spaces of about 1,000 square feet equipped with air vents, electricity, water and sewer connections, and fitted with emergency signaling systems. Some facilities, such as a laboratory producing a chemical used in grenades, had alternative exits, usually in connection with the adjacent building. The pre-war character of Warsaw allowed these production sites to exist within the very center of the city. Warsaw's inner city neighborhoods were saturated with artisan shops as well as small-scale manufacturing establishments located within inner courtyards of tenements. Widely considered eyesore before the war, the poor quality wooden structures that housed shoemakers, tailors, metal workers, and alike, operating amid in combination with housing realm, prove an ideal environment for clandestine manufacturing, a real asset in the fight against the occupier. Loud external traffic worked as a white noise to the sounds of machinery running underground. Locating these facilities within the central districts eliminated long-distance transport and avoided security searches. The volume of the underground press reached approximately 600 periodicals, printed in 11 underground facilities. A single edition of the most widely disseminated information bulletin varied from 45 to 50,000. The number of ammunition and weapons were equally voluminous. The Warsaw Underground's estimated wartime grenade production was 300 to 400,000. The years between 1939 and 1945 saw intensification within Warsaw of existing urban environment of fragmenting of interior spaces. The conditions of the Nazi occupation revealed to the pre-war populace an unexpected value of the dense urban fabric and mixed-use environment of Warsaw. Clandestine interiors were produced by modification of existing spaces and their fabrication fueled by urgent necessity. Creativity and skill was realized in their undetectability to anyone who was not the designer, builder, or user. A discoverment instant obliteration. A wartime vernacular, this clandestine building activity was carried out without a paper trace, based on verbal instructions. We know of this existence from the testimonies and memoirs of survivors. And the scanned photographic documentation and occasional sketch from memory offer a glimpse into the ephemeral wartime city. Yet the building activity described here is familiar to us. It belongs to the military history and the history of the Holocaust. In fact, without purposefully constructed covered underground archival storage, our knowledge of the wartime ordeal of the Warsaw Jews would be much more limited. The existence of covered spaces had no impact on the external appearance of the city, but hiding locations, clandestine facilities are expected feature of any long-time military occupation and an essential ingredient of wartime experience. Thank you.